Yeah, I've new to the art world. I'm an ex-lawyer, and I spent many years working in the city. But I used art as a way to decompress, as a way to keep me in contact with something that was larger and more meaningful, perhaps, than the day-to-day of my role. And having done that for some considerable time, I confess, I decided that, and I was lucky enough to be able to sort of indulge more, something that was more meaningful for me, and to actually try and have a new direction in the world of creative arts. And so I really just threw myself into it. Did some evening classes, but then did a foundation diploma in art and design at City Lit, and loved every minute of it. And so really and I managed to do that in lockdown, which was such a privilege. I mean, you do say, you know, lockdown has been a terrible and difficult time for many of us, but there's also been some positives that have come out of it as well. And for me, this was one, having the space and the commitment to be able to do that was fantastic. Yeah, precisely. And to be able to fill time constructively and have a sort of more compassionate outlook to ourselves and to others, and to what artists can actually bring to make the world a better place. I think we forget sometimes that there is an opportunity for art to be so healing in such a broad way, that it's very nice that, you know, we're sort of being, you know, everything now is talking about, you know, well-being through art and creativity, and it's really nice to have that confirmation or affirmation, if you like, that's real now. And you know, lots of artists doing lots of wonderful things online for everybody. I've noticed that the open calls have changed. They're much more egalitarian, if you like, where, you know, getting rid of the barriers between professional artists and amateurs, and that's fantastic. You know, the more that people can have access to art and art education, and that really is spot on. Yeah, yeah, sure, absolutely. These were pieces that I made during lockdown when I was trying to really be grounded in something that added value for me. Just a little bit of background about my practice, I think, might help. I mean, for me, working as I had in this sort of environment, I found that I'd sort of lost what it was to be a woman. In a way, in these kinds of roles, you sometimes have to pretend or behave, if you like, as if you're male. And the feminine side, regardless of whether you are a woman or whether you identify as a woman, the feminine side is not often acknowledged as an important contributor. And it's only recently that board members and board companies have had to employ women and people who identify as women to try and, you know, bring those skills of compassion, open-mindedness, calmness and kindness into the workplace. Because women are not particularly linear, they're much more encompassing, and it's a skill that is not often accepted, you know, in these kinds of environments. So a lot of my work is about trying to reconnect with what it is to be me and to be female. You know, as a woman of a certain age, you know, all of those things. It's quite nice to, you know, sit down and think about what is me that's not associated with my past role. And so in lockdown, I really did try and impose some things around looking at what it meant to be me and what made me feel connected. And I come from a pretty humble background, and my father was a builder and decorator, and I'm first generation university. So what was really nice for me was to sit back and really think about the modesty of materials and what we're actually using materials for and why. You know, my father would create a wonderful space out of nothing. You know, it just had to look right. It didn't have to be right. It just had to look great, and he could do that. And that, yeah, and I wanted to be able to try and do that. So I literally over the summer got some old bits of paper, modest materials, and just tried to capture some of the benefits that I've felt just by, it's called tree bathing, isn't it? Forest bathing, where you just go into nature and just allow yourself a space to reconnect and to understand that there is more than this. You know, there's more than this sort of depressive news and everything else that's going on, and the chaos that it feels. And coming away, just looking at some of the trees on Wimbledon Common, which is where I am, yeah, and I just made some out of some old bits of packing material from Amazon, because that was to hand, modest, and it was almost like using paper to bring the tree back. You know, it was a sort of circular as well. So I just sort of put together this tree, and then photographed it. And then I was very taken by Tacita Dean's work on some of the really major trees, where she's photographed them and then brought them into the foreground by removing some of the background. I just sort of had a play with putting some acrylic down on the back, and it worked, you know, really well. It sort of made everything pop, and I was really pleased with that. But I took a lot of solace from the one tree that I have in my courtyard garden, which is an Acer. And I just wanted to celebrate it. It's not been very well, and I don't know if it's going to survive. So I just did some work sort of capturing the leaves and the bark from last summer. And again, using modest materials, some watercolours, and then to bring it to life, just using domestic bleach to bring out, you know, some of the highlights. And it was just so nice to just sort of be using everyday objects. So those are my Acer pieces as well. And finally, I did some watercolours just with some, what I did was I was flicking through magazines, and I would see pictures of how you could send flowers in the post. And it's such a wonderful thing to do, especially in lockdown. You know, you can't see each other. So I spent a lot of time sending flowers to people. And when I looked at these adverts, I started just sketching out some of the flowers. And as I put them together and turned them upside down, it looked to me more like a seascape. And consequently, that's why I've got these flowers that sort of look like they're slightly underwater. But so those were the things that I was doing to connect, I think, during lockdown. Yeah. As you do get older, nostalgia becomes important. But I mean, how you deploy nostalgia is really, again, it can be constructive or it can be negative. And nostalgia can just be a way of celebrating lovely memories if you want it to be. Or, you know, you can tap into something darker. Equally valid either way. At the moment, for me, where I am now, it's the positive energy that I want to sort of get out, to unleash. And that's why another one of my angles of the work that I'm doing is really just trying to tap in more into the subconscious mind, is to be using the spirituality of repetitive drawing, repetitive mark making in my work to sort of tap into something a bit more fundamental. And so those are some of the other aspects that I've been looking at as well. I was very interested to see that one of your, I think you've got surrealism coming up, but that is one of my major things. It's not so much the figurative nature of surrealism, it's more the fundamental, you know, the something. And again, the surrealists were very much looking at the feminine as the fulcrum for all creation. And that, for me, really speaks again about identity and trying to connect with that. So, yeah, it's quite interesting because the surrealists have been, of course, called a boys' club. But actually, most of the surrealist writers were women. And in fact, you know, a lot of times it's the lazy academics who haven't looked at that part that you get this sort of skewed, I think, interpretation sometimes. But they were quite avant-garde. They were very open to diverse sexuality and individuals. You know, I think it was something that I was looking at myself and have been for a while, and trying to justify why I would wish to, you know, use some of the techniques like fumage or frottage or these sort of processes if it was just, you know, a male dominated art movement. But it's not really an art movement, it's more philosophy and a way of life, and I think that is quite interesting. There's a new publication out about surreal women and the writing, which I thought was very moving. And I hope to use some of the poems in my work in some iteration. I'm not sure how. I've got some old prints behind me that I found in a 1920s fashion magazine. And in the middle of this magazine is like a little needlepoint guide, like we would have Sudoku now. There's this little guide on how to do make a shawl or some trim for a table. But the patterns are beautiful, and I'm hoping to sort of use them to sort of sew in some poetry, some female-oriented poetry, because obviously that's another area, isn't it? Textiles, which is very much seen as a craft, almost denigrated, and yet it's not a craft. It's an art form. It's the strength of the female, and the roles of, if we go back, I mean, I'm very interested in Greek mythology, but text in art, but also as the way the women would control things in ancient Greece. Fascinating stuff. So yes, a little bit of that going on as well. Yeah, so I mean, at the moment, I'm really, because I'm starting out, you've got to, and I wrote it, I like writing blogs because I find it concentrates my thinking. And at the moment, my blogs seem to all be about administration. What I'm trying to do is take the risk of putting myself out there. So some of the work that I've already got, and sometimes work that I might make. So, for example, I dabbled in some oil painting, which I've really enjoyed. There's a huge mystique about oil painting. It's actually not that difficult. You just have to have patience to let it dry. That's the difference. But it's actually a fabulous medium. So I put it into a rather prestigious show and was rejected, and that's absolutely fine. But this is what I need to be doing. I need to roll with those punches and just seek some affirmation. That for it's not as if I would stop working if no one ever wanted to look at my work. But we're human, aren't we? So a lot of the time I've been spending over the summer has been looking at open calls, looking at my portfolio, and seeing, if anybody might be interested in sharing, my work. And I was delighted to. I think the virtual exhibition is absolutely brilliant. It's delightful, and it's curious, and it's beautifully done. It's just spot on, and you can see how this is the way that we're going to be going. Possibly, who knows what's going to happen in the future. But if we've got all these different opportunities, that's what it's all about, and reaching different opportunities. Fantastic. So other exhibitions for me, I went to the New Haven open call, which is just like anyone's work can go in, which was very nice, and I was lucky enough to be chosen. And mine is a skull. It's a bull's skull. It's on my website, which I've reimagined, because one of the things I want to be able to do is to repurpose things. It's so important to make things that are unloved have a new life and maybe a new identity. And so for me, we've got all these animal skulls that people hang up on them, and it's not nice, yeah. But the animal is, you could just destroy them all. But the fact is, there's some tenuous link between that animal's existence for me, and so to repurpose it is something interesting. I've got two great big horns behind me that I bought on. Which I'm about to do something with. But this one, it's a skull of a bull, and I repurposed it to call it Mercury and put lots of sort of fire and magma around it. And because the poor old bovine is being blamed for global warming, we couldn't write it, could you? And so I just decided that it would be nice if I could actually, there is a power behind these animals, and I just wanted to be able to express that. So I made that piece for the New Haven Open Call. I was also lucky enough to have some work accepted by Boomer Gallery in Tooley Street for their Icon exhibition. So I had some pieces in there, and again, these pieces are more about my identity, and also the use of repetition, and just trying to tap into something fundamental in me. So it's the use of colour, very abstract. For me, it is about abstraction, and less figurative. I'm happy to repurpose something because it is obviously figurative, but for me, the abstraction is what I'm looking at. But my métier is to use at the moment is aluminium because it is the most sustainable material that's out there. They don't mine it anymore. Most of it's recycled. But apart from sand, aluminium is the most abundant element on the planet. So to use aluminium as a support for whatever medium it's obviously got everything going for it is what I've been doing, and I've been using aluminium domestic paints as a nod to my background. Yeah, so painting and decorating stuff. Yeah, and tape, because tape as a line, I looked at a lot of my research has been around the work of Bernard Cohen. He uses the line as an element of identity. It's almost like it evokes the infinite possibilities of my future. Yeah, the lines, the directions, so much going for it. So I've done a few pieces. I've done a series of 4 on the 4 seasons with different colours, and so that's another area that I've been looking at. And luckily one of my foumages has been accepted into an exhibition that's coming up, which I'm really thrilled about. It's an exhibition. It's all online, I think, but it's just little. It can't be more than 10 centimeters square. I think I've got it here. I'll just hold it up so you can have a bit of a laugh. But it was just really doing that technique of putting the candle underneath, letting it burn, and then drawing what comes from the subconscious into that predestination, if you like, that's already there from smoke. So again, that sort of surrealism and untapping something hidden, I think, is sort of where I'm coming from. And I think you only have one life, and you don't. It is no dress rehearsal, you know. And I think that's another thing that lockdown has shown us, hasn't it? You know, that we have to seize the moment, because you don't know what's going to be taken from you. And I remember, you know, thinking, I'll go and do a residency in Athens, and I'll take my mum and we'll sit there. And of course, Athens almost burnt down, for goodness sakes. The world is in chaos, yeah. And so if we can, I think, for me, what the art does is it helps reconcile, you know, that external chaos, yeah. It helps the internal. It just helps doing something that gets all of that out. And if it's expressive, I do hope with mine. Look, this isn't to say that. Look, there's different art for everybody, but for me, it's about having an open aesthetic. You know, what I'm trying to create is work that someone might like to hang up, yeah. But that's not just purely decorative. And this is one of the conversations we often have, isn't it, in art? It's not about being decorative, yeah. It's about that there's a huge underlying rigor and research, symbolism, the use of material, all of those disciplines into why that work has come to be, yeah. And that's the difference between, I think, creating art that you really are proud of and creating little monoprints that you can buy on Etsy, yeah, which are beautiful, lovely, yeah. So for me, it's the rigor behind, you know, the thought process of why I captured the Acer. It's almost, you're absolutely right, it's almost a Victorian memento mori, which is probably why subconsciously I've done very dark backgrounds to them, you know, navy and black, as if you like, and that's probably why I chose to do that. And the flowers of the ocean, again, the significance of I love the water, but knowing that we're damaging, you know, all of that stuff comes into. And that's, for me, is really important, is the rigor and discipline behind why that work has been produced.